Alrighty, so episode 3 of Project Royal Enfield, or PRE for short. We've already done the Stage 2 DNA kit in episode 1, and the Hitchcock full free-flowing exhaust in episode 2. If you've not seen those, I'll link them in the description and add them in the cards thing on this YouTube video. For those of you who are just now tuning into the series for the first time, the goal here with Project Royal Enfield is to see if it's possible to make the bike more capable and more well-rounded as a daily rider. Whether or not these performance parts actually do anything is all part of the process. If they don't do what they claim, or maybe the quality of the product is not what it seems to be, then at least I bought it for the series to document the results, and you didn't make the mistake of buying it only to be met with disappointment and a lighter wallet. My biggest takeaway so far is that the bike is significantly smoother in the throttle response, and I'm able to hang on to the bike's top speed all day long on highway with zero issues at all, whereas the stock classic 350 had not only a much laggier, almost choppy throttle response, but it really did not like going highway speeds for long periods of time. Of course, if we can make the bike quicker, it's just an added bonus at the end of the day for me. Whether or not you feel the price or effort is worth it is subjective, and of course will vary from person to person. If you think it's stupid to do all this to a 350cc single cylinder, non-performance oriented bike, well, I guess just be glad it's not your bike, and then it really shouldn't matter at the end of the day. But before I get to the video, I wanted to throw around the idea of setting up a Patreon account for the channel. Really, my thought process on this boils down to the fact that I'm not exactly able to produce these videos as fast or as frequent as I would like, because parts are obviously expensive. And after the series is over, with your guys' help, I want to be able to branch out with other Royal Enfield bikes, like a Scram, for example, or maybe something from a different brand, and do separate project style videos similar to this with those bikes. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Anyway, today I'm going to be installing the Fuelx Lite. From my understanding, the bike runs very lean from the factory, with the addition of the DNA Stage 2 filter kit and the Hitchcock exhaust. I'm positive that the fuel mixture is even that much more out of whack. The Fuelx is supposed to correct that, and as a result, make the bike much happier. Now, I opted for the Lite because it automatically makes the adjustments for you, basically auto-tuning, where the Pro has a separate controller where you can physically make the adjustments yourself. For reference, the Lite version cost around $150 US, while the Pro version is around $180, which for something like this really isn't that bad. For example, a Power Commander 6 for my Versys 300 would run me over $500. So the Fuelx has quite a few claims on the side of the box, some of which I'm entirely skeptical of. It's supposed to reduce engine and exhaust temps while, of course, enhancing the engine's life. It's supposed to eliminate flat spots and jerkiness, apparently lesser downshifts, and improved power and torque. The power and torque claim kind of bother me because on their website, they don't make any sort of comment on the gains that you could achieve with the product. Now, granted, maybe they did this because it varies depending on if you have a different exhaust or the DNA air filter kit, whatever, but there isn't any sort of numbers or graph comparing a stock bike versus one with the Fuelx that may or may not have various other aftermarket parts. And because of that, I actually reached out to the company And the response I got back on email was a little bit odd. Forgo the typos and misspelling. After all, it's a product of India, so English very well may not be their first language, at least with the person who responded to me. It says, and I quote, "Fuelx is not a performance product. It will auto-learn and correct the air-fuel ratio to give you the best riding experience by removing all the jerks and stalling. There will be a slight increase in torque, and along with that, there will be an increase in acceleration and throttle response. All of this by keeping you engine cooler than stock temperatures." I mean, by definition, this is exactly what a performance product would do. So the response doesn't really help in any way. Regardless, here is the device itself, which certainly seems well made. You have a wiring harness, which did throw me for a loop. Now, every single video I've watched on this product, at least with the 350s, never once did they have the additional ground wire. I don't know if I have a newer version of the product or what that's about. But honestly, the installation of the Fuelx is actually much more simple than I could have imagined, even for someone like me who is often intimidated by anything involving electrical stuff with vehicles. So hey, if I can do this, honestly, really anyone could. I did the best I could to film with the GoPro on my chest, but there are more in-depth install videos online if you so desire to look at those. Regardless, I'm going to give you a fairly brief idea on how to set this thing up. The first thing you're going to want to do is remove the seat, which is held on by 2 bolts. Once you have that removed, simply pull back on the seat, lift up, and get it out of the way. Then you have to remove the tank, which is held on by this mounting bolt right here. Once you have that done, grab yourself 2 towels and place them towards the front of the tank, tucking it underneath to prevent scratching to the frame, and then prop up the back end of the tank and put another towel down there so that it's easier to get to the connections for the fuel pump and the fuel line. They're both on the left side of the bike, you can't really miss them. In the last video, for whatever reason, I thought there was a clip underneath the tank that mounted the connector for the O2 sensor. That's just not true. The sweat dripping into my eyeballs probably gave me some sort of illusion at the time when I was doing the full exhaust, but no. All you have to do at this point is lift up the tank and pop off the 2 vacuum lines connected underneath. They do not have any sort of retainer clips holding them to the tank, so they shouldn't take much effort to pop off, and because they are 2 completely different sizes, you would have to go out of your way to install them incorrectly, if that's even possible in the first place. But once you have the tank off, the hardest part is done. Everything else at this point is a cakewalk. All you really need to do is disconnect the clip from the O2 sensor, then take your Fuelx harness and connect the male and female ends to the O2 sensor plug. Now you then route that cable from the O2 sensor to the frame, over top the spark plug wires, and onto the left side of the bike where that Fuelx module will mount to that round utility cover. You will have a ton of length left to the harness. I went back and made sure to secure the connections to the frame with numerous zip ties. I probably went overkill with it, but whatever. Paying attention not to have any of the cords dangling around anywhere near close to the engine. Especially the new O2 sensor plugs that wobble around like a flaccid, well, you know. So I've already taken it upon myself to remove the cover and the plastic piece which will be used to mount the Fuelx module. The plastic is held to the bike with 3 bolts. The bottom 2 are longer and act as spacers. It's really hard to mess this up. I've seen a few other YouTubers utilize this same space for the Fuelx, all with different ways of mounting the device to the plastic trim. Some were more engineered than others, but honestly, I'm just going to go for a simple route, but you can do whatever you want. I simply drilled some holes and zip-tied the device to the thing. Once you have the trim and the Fuelx module placed back on the bike, it's just a matter of feeding the harness inside the opening and containing it to the cover. Now, all that leaves is the ground wire, which I will be connecting to the negative terminal on the battery. This wasn't hard to do either, it was just kind of annoying. I just had to pop off both of the right side covers and fished the connector over that way. You will have to pull the battery out most of the way to make it easier for you. Then once you have everything placed back together, you're all set and ready to go. You got the cables all wrapped up, everything's neat and tidy. You should be ready to start the bike. Altogether, this took me maybe a half hour of my time to install, and you'll know when it's working because you'll see lights flash from red to green, and that's just the Fuelx automatically adjusting the fuel mixture. I did notice that the bike was idling a little bit different than prior. It was smoother sounding, the idle. It seemed more consistent, if that makes any sense. As I was putzing around town, I did notice that the bike was becoming even more smooth, both on the low end of the RPMs as well as the high end. The bike definitely feels happier and more eager to take you anywhere you want to go. I did notice that the Hitchcock exhaust seemed to negatively affect the low end. It made the bike a little bit more choppy in low speeds, even with that Stage 2 DNA filter kit. But the Fuelx has definitely remedied that choppiness in the low end. It takes off better than it ever had before, and it cruises at low or high speeds without any complaints. I can tell the Fuelx is working because the exhaust doesn't pop anywhere near as much. Like before, anytime I would decelerate, it would pop like crazy, almost like someone put Crackle Tune on a Honda Civic. But now the pops are few and far between, which I'm sure the neighbors appreciate. Now, I'm not sold on the idea that installing the Fuelx is somehow going to lead to less downshifts, but as far as it reducing engine and exhaust temps, this I was kind of able to test out. Well, unfortunately, I do not have one of those oil temp plugs to validate that 100%. However, I do have a cobalt temp gun, and I was able to take some readings before and after the Fuelx install. I mainly focused on the header, which, Jesus Christ, the bike runs ridiculously hot. 400 degrees Fahrenheit was the highest it read, with it mostly fluctuating around 300 degrees. It's no wonder why the exhaust has changed color in dramatic fashion. Now, I didn't really know what to expect with the Fuelx and its low temp claim, but look at this. I ran the bike for probably around 40 minutes, and the temp difference is wildly different. The header was reading around 200 to 260-ish degrees. It's unbelievable how different that is, and I can only imagine that the engine is running much cooler as well. I mean, seriously, almost a 200-degree change is shockingly different. As for the yellowing and discoloration of the exhaust, it can be addressed with some Chemical Guys heavy metal polish, so I'm not concerned about that at all, but it does make you wonder how much wear the engine has withstood without this Fuelx installed prior to anything else. There is a method to my madness. Like, I purposely installed this Fuelx after the other parts to show people that the Fuelx is absolutely necessary. And if you do want to modify your bike like I have, you should install the Fuelx before the exhaust. You may be able to get away with it with the Stage 2 DNA kit first. I can't say for sure, but definitely install a Fuelx before you mess around with the exhaust at all. But the question I have yet to answer is if it had any effect on my 0 to 60 speed. Now, this is where things get a little interesting. Again, I need to point out that a bike stock is claimed to do 12.5 seconds. Prior to the Fuelx, my best was just a hair under 12 seconds. Now, with the Fuelx installed, yes, it did have an impact on my 0 to 60. In fact, I was able to achieve 60 miles per hour of 11 seconds, which is a pretty good jump, but there is an issue. So I recently purchased a Draggy. It's a device that accurately measures your speed, acceleration. It can tell if you're on flat ground or on a slope. It has a ton of information that I'm still in the process of figuring out. And according to the device, my best 0 to 60 after the Fuelx was installed was 12.4 seconds. And bear in mind, this was a best of 3 runs. But this confused me. I know damn well just from watching the footage, I'm getting to 60 miles per hour in 11 seconds, maybe slightly longer, but we're talking like milliseconds here. It never occurred to me until now that the speedometer is just flat out inaccurate. And I only realized this when I was looking down at the Draggy when I was going, according to the bike, 75 miles per hour. But both the Draggy and the GPS app I use on the phone were both saying 71 miles per hour, which makes me entirely suspect of the 12.5 second claim on a stock Classic 350. Like, there's no possible way they were using any sort of GPS type device to track the speed. They had to have been going off of what the speedometer was reading. The annoying thing about this is that I know better. I've been on numerous other bikes that have the same problem, from Honda to Kawasaki and at worst Chinese bikes. So the fact that I trusted the speedometer from the beginning was an error on my part from the get-go. But hey, it is what it is. At least I figured it out now. If anyone has a solution to better calibrate the speedometer on the Classic 350, I'd love to know, because this now means my bike cannot do the 75 miles per hour top speed like the speedometer is reading. I'm only able to do 71, which isn't a huge deal, but the extra 4 miles per hour definitely makes a difference on the highway. So that's where we are with the bike so far. To my understanding, the only other performance part out there is the camshaft upgrade from Hitchcock Motorcycles. I've heard things about the possibility of a big bore kit, but no actual hard evidence that it's even being produced, at least that I've seen. I've also had people tell me to get an ECU upgrade, but as far as to my knowledge, that doesn't exist for these 350s. The cam is out of stock at the moment, so I can't exactly install that one yet, and I'll be honest, it's not something that I'm personally comfortable doing myself, so I'll have to have a dealer work on that part for me if they are willing to, but we'll see what happens with that. Overall though, I'm very happy with the bike, and all of the parts I've put on it so far. I do have a couple other things I want to install on the bike that are, I guess, more cosmetic items and for rider comfort, so we'll get to that in due time. Also, again, let me know your thoughts on the Patreon idea. It's still kind of up in the air at this point. So with that said, everyone, that's going to wrap things up here. Thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, take care and ride safe.